We were walking to school using the same route I used to go with Himitsu for years. Ellie took me by the arm, which only strengthened my cognitive dissonance. I didn't know how I was supposed to act and mostly kept quiet. It seemed that initiating a pointless conversation about nothing with Ellie was the best idea, but she herself never went quiet for a second, constantly talking about school, music, telling me about her plans for the upcoming concert. And occasionally I would forget who was walking by my side and saw her as a normal girl. But once bitten, twice shy, I held back and forced myself to always be on guard. I had no idea what the future held, but for now I had to preserve this relationship and act in whatever way kept Ellie pleased. Nobody discussed our romance in public. They were probably just too scared to. Naturally, there was plenty of talk behind our backs, but that wasn't surprising. High schoolers don't need much of a reason to gossip. Yet there was a more straightforward person to be found within the walls of the school. Oh. The fuck are you? I was expecting, when he said straightforward person, I was expecting Kyosuke to pop up. But no, here's some fucking rando. We stumbled upon Takehito Toka at the lockers. She was in the same class as Ellie, but you wouldn't call them good friends. Kabayashi-san, Anakin-kun. She greeted us coldly. Taka-san. You're together very early in the morning. She remarked, looking at us reproachfully. I can never understand that Japanese saying about morning. Would we look different in the afternoon or evening? Are you surprised by that? I don't think that I'm the only one who is. That's the first time I'm hearing about it. Ellie dramatically flung her hands up in the air. Her affectation was a bit overblown, in my opinion. You don't see a problem with this yourself. I don't. Kabayashi-san, you've changed a lot lately, and I can't say that it's been for the better. Yeah, I wonder who decides how I should act. Ellie, maybe we shouldn't. I whispered timidly, but she was already out of control. Ellie probably hadn't failed to notice the disapproving looks from the girls, or the open envy of the guys. She could not hear her classmates whispering behind her back, and Takehito-san's words were just the straw to break the camel's back. On the other hand, it wasn't hard to understand Ellie's feelings. They were not the first and only couple in the school, and for whatever reason, the others didn't get this kind of attention. So summon us for our meeting with the disciplinary committee. Is there a reason I should? She parried caustically. Takehito was also the head of that institution, one I personally found very confusing. Any time, Taka-san. Ellie straightened up and glared at the school inquisitor, as some called Takehito behind her back, with fire in her eyes. Kabayashi-san, I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to explain that the school has certain norms. How do you like this? Ellie exclaimed, grabbed me by the lapels, pulled me in, and seized my lips with a passionate kiss. I didn't have time to react and just froze in an unnatural pose with my eyes wide open, staring at Takehito. Ellie's stunt seemed to be no less of a shock to her. I felt surprise, embarrassment, burning shame in sequence. Ellie didn't care. She acted like we were alone at my place. Maybe even more passionately, in a way. Finally, I gently but firmly pushed her away, but Ellie paid no attention to that and immediately turned to Takehito. Hey, like that, huh, Taka-san? Lara just sighed deeply in response, as if she were utterly disappointed in someone she used to treat with great respect. I have nothing else to say, Kobayashi-san. Just remember it might be too late when you finally come to your senses. Having said that, she left, and I was relieved to know that nobody else seemed to have seen Ellie's escapade. Why would you do that? I snapped at her as soon as Takehito walked away. What, did I fluster you to embarrass much? Ellie smirked and glared angrily at me, almost like she had a toko. Why do you always need to jump to extremes? Does it have to be either puritanism or debauchery? So you think I'm debauched? I don't. Actions don't always define who we are, especially what we do when we're emotional. We just need to, I don't know, be a bit more careful in some situations. I didn't expect to hear that from you, Nick. From anyone else, but not you. Any reasonable person in my place would react the same, except someone would keep their mouth shut. Reasonable. Ellie frowned, then suddenly lowered her eyes, wrapped her arms around herself, and seemed to become smaller. I love you, Nick. Don't you love me? I love you too. I had to make quite an effort to make the words sound genuine. But Takehito isn't preventing us from loving each other. She's talking about... Indeed, what did the school inquisitor want from us? Till now, we hadn't been kissing each other in public, and had been holding hands on school grounds. What else could there be? Were we supposed to keep several meters away from each other? It's all just pointless conventions. Maybe you're right. I guess I can even agree with you, just... you didn't have to jump on me in front of everyone like that. Nobody saw us. But they could have. Are you that worried about it? It's weird you aren't. Now you're talking like Toko. Because she was right. Because the truth is impartial. I tried to make it sound like a joke. Fine. Maybe you're right, and I overdid it a bit. Sorry. Didn't expect her to agree with me, so I didn't know how to react. See you later then. Yeah. I walked to her classroom while I spent a while staying at the lockers, thinking about what had just happened. Kagome was acting as if nothing had happened at all. But the reaction to her return was quite predictable. People avoided Iwamura like a leper. If before she had only been talked to out of necessity, now she was outright ignored. By the teachers, too. Although Kagome didn't seem to be too bothered by it. She would come to a lesson, take notes in her notebook, then leave after the bell, probably for the roof. You'd be forgiven for being surprised that her issue with the police had been resolved so quickly, but Kobayashi Jun's influence could be clearly felt here, and he wasn't known for dragging his heels. Of course, I was glad justice had finally prevailed, but in every other respect, the situation felt abnormal. She at least could have changed schools. It was even weirder that as soon as Kagome had been released, her father was found. He didn't know anything useful about who had kidnapped him or what they wanted from him. Akira Shinji spent the entire time in a dark cellar without once being interrogated or asked anything. That was clearly the corporation's doing too, but for the life of me, I couldn't thread together all the events that had happened in the past 2 weeks. Correlations were neatly disguised as true causes, and those in turn had so many incoming and outgoing connections that the average person could never hope to understand it all. The web it all weaved was enormous. And as much as I wanted to figure it all out, I was busy spending all my time with Ellie. During lunch, she stormed into the classroom like a SWAT team assaulting a crack house. As if the wild kiss from Takahito a couple hours earlier had never happened. Nick, let's go eat. There's nothing wrong with the invitation to lunch itself, but Ellie's insistence and cheerfulness was a little out of line with local decency. Oh, who gives a shit about that? It's one thing to be macking out in front of the fucking head of the fucking snitches, alright? That's another thing to be that fucking, rules and whatnot. But it's like, I don't know. She's a bit too cheery asking me to go eat lunch. It's like, okay, pussy, sack the fuck up a little bit. Everyone in the classroom was giving us discreet and not so discreet looks. I love how they spelled discreet 2 different ways. Of course, by now they were somewhat used to Ellie-sama's daily visits, but I still felt like I was in a cage at the zoo, naked. I really felt like I needed a break from all the attention, even Ellie's. At the same time, I was afraid that rejecting her offer would cause her to get emotional again. Interesting. Oops, I clicked the wrong thing. Interesting. 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 So, like, they try to present it as, like, oh, is accepting really the right choice? Are you sure about that? I'll accept. I'll see where we go. In for a penny. Let's go. We walked into the corridor, followed by the gaze of my classmates. Ta-da! Ellie took a nice-looking bag from behind her back and handed it to me. Inside were 2 luxurious bento boxes. I'd like to say I made them myself, but... Cool. I whistled, genuinely surprised. Of course, the taste of food does depend on how much love was put into cooking it, but this was clearly a bento from a real chef. And that's always delicious. So I decided not to worry about the specifics of my lunch's origin. Let's go to the cafeteria. Today is such a nice day. Let's eat outside. Isn't it cold? Not at all. In reality, I just didn't want to be in the center of everyone's attention again. We walked up to the roof, and, as one might have expected, ran into Kagome there. While I was agonizing over how to find somewhere to be alone with Ellie, I completely forgot this place had a master already. Iwamura-san. Ellie greeted her coldly. Pfft. Kagome scoffed and marched past us wearing an upset for whatever reason expression. Just not going to tell me I said something wrong again. Ellie frowned, walked to a bench, and sat down. I have not said a word. God, sometimes it seems to me that she enjoys everyone thinking she's a weirdo. After Kagome had been acquitted, even Ellie had admitted that someone else was guilty of murdering her friends. It's interesting how some people are only barely moved by logical arguments, yet at the same time believe everything people with power or authority say. I don't want to criticize Ellie for being unable to think for herself, but she seemed to have forgiven Iwamura a little too easily. Although Ellie might have simply been holding herself back for my sake. Obviously innocent people shouldn't suffer for what they've done. for what they haven't done, but sometimes I really wish they'd make a separate article in the penal code for just for Iwamura. I imagined Ellie as a prosecutor at a trial. My mental image was so convincing that I couldn't help but let out a snicker. Sorry. What's so funny? Nothing. Just thought you'd make a fine prosecutor. Yeah, sure. I looked at the bento with a genuine sadness in her eyes, as if answers she had long been seeking were hidden in that little box. Have the real murderers get what they deserve. After everything that happened, I was almost positive the KGB had nothing to do with it, and Irina had only made use of the situation. But if it wasn't the Soviets, then who? It seemed like you'd need the detective skills of Sherlock Holmes to solve this mystery. Has your grandfather mentioned anything? I asked cautiously. No, but... She pouted, as if remembering something unpleasant. The investigation is still on. I see. But enough about sad stuff. I had somewhat gotten used to her sudden mood shifts. I want to talk about the concert. Right, the concert. What? I haven't had any time to play bass recently. And his fault is that? Well, you need two people to have sex, so it's not fair to just blame me. Ellie blushed, opened her eyes wide, and finally threw a piece of asparagus at me. Even if it's true, you could have worded that better. Carefully picked the asparagus up from the bench with my chopsticks. Yeah, I've never tried asparagus before. This is asparagus, right? Yes. I replied, annoyed. I just think that asparagus was something related to the sea, like a sea cucumber or something. A trepang. A what? A trepang, an edible sea cucumber. I don't understand how you could mistake asparagus for it. Well, sometimes mental associations work out weirdly. But I want you to associate this week with a concert. As you say, Ojo-sama. Great. Today we'll go home and rehearse as soon as class is over. The fact that she said home and not your place, but just home, rubbed me the wrong way. That's how people usually talk about their home. Yeah, because you don't understand how much she fucking doesn't like living the lavish life. How much she enjoys, this solitude away from the hustle and bustle of all that shit. You fucking dillhole. He's like, oh no, she seems to think my place is home. This crazy bitch. Like, were you not like paying attention when she said that she wanted to move in with you? She said it was like a pipe dream, but that didn't change the fact that she wants it to happen, you fucking dillhole. It'd be a bit strange to say that you're going home when you're going to another person's house, but she feels at home there with you. You should be happy about that, numb nuts. And her guitar, comb, several tubs of incomprehensible creams and ointments, shampoo, and other hygiene products on the shelf in the bathroom had also moved to that new home. Then how have you not gotten the picture yet, dillhole? I still can't say I'm totally confident in my skills. Rehearsing is one thing, but performing for a crowd? Confidence comes with experience, and you can't get experience without putting in effort. I remembered my idea of Ellie being able to play guitar as soon as she was born. People have different levels of talent by nature. Tja, but I think you have more than enough talent to play bass, and Zed feels. She put the bento away, kneeled on the bench, arched her back, and leaned in close to me in a very erotic fashion. Playful expression and the predatory gleam in her eyes left no doubt about Ellie's intentions. Hey, not here. Why not? There's no one on the reef except us. What if Iwamura comes back? We can have a threesome. And it's a bit cold here for that. Did she say it wasn't cold outside? She merely stood up and threw a hurt look my way. Felt warmer in the morning. I also stood up and shivered dramatically. And class is about to start. Why'd you follow up? I was like, it's not like you last long anyway. Fine. Ellie agreed reluctantly. I'll see you in the yard after class. Ma'am, yes ma'am. Somehow smoothed my demolish, whatever the fuck that means. I pulled Ellie to me and gave her a big kiss. Okay. Very interested to see how this all resolves itself. Because clearly, you didn't get the happy ever. We're not happily ever after, right? There's still some trepidation, some troubles brewing in the waters there. Some things left unresolved. Okay, I'm about it. Class was over pretty soon, which meant I was going to be at Ellie's full disposal for the rest of the day. Couldn't say I managed to get tired of her in only a week, but deep inside I felt I needed some more time alone. Right. She is so obsessed with getting... I see that issue there. She's so obsessed with, getting away from that life, and her only outlet is with Nick, but Nick's also like, hey, it can't just be us 24/7. homie needs some me time, which is true. Yo, even if you love each other very much, sometimes you need a little goddamn me time. I was standing at the gate occasionally, catching unfriendly glances from students as they passed by. God, I felt like I'd been put up on a wanted poster somewhere. Take Takehito. Take. I was like, I'm pretty sure her name's not Take. Take Takehito. She looked at me, stopped for a second as if remembering something, and then strode away. I looked at the clock. Ellie was late. Are you waiting for Ojo-sama? I heard a familiar voice behind my back. I immediately straightened up and turned around. It was Kagemaru. Well, yeah. I replied unsurely, as if confessing something shameful. You'll see her later. Let's go for a ride. To where? Kobayashi Dono wants to see you. I hardly had a choice, so I followed him to the car. The clear, sunny day felt very different in Kobayashi Jun's office, so close to the sun. Down there, Tokyo was drowning in a furious sea of lights, while you watched all that interplay of white and yellow, enjoying the cool air inside the office, like you were looking out of a spaceship. Come in, Nikolai. Take a seat. The old man said, and I could hear something like weariness or irritation in his voice. Apparently, it was going to be a serious conversation. Yeah, let's see what happens. I slowly sat down in the armchair opposite to him, crossed my legs, but immediately felt I wasn't comfortable sitting like that. Then I straightened my back unnaturally and put my hands on my knees. Relax, Nikolai. All the worst has already passed. I was about to ask him what he was talking about on autopilot, but restrained myself. In any case, Ellie's grandfather looked far less friendly today, even if that friendliness had always been feigned. Has Elizabeth told you anything about her parents? Only that they're no longer with us, I replied carefully. Yes, I suppose it isn't the most pleasant topic for her. And, under different circumstances, we would never be discussing it now. But, he sighed heavily and closed his eyes. At the end of the 60s, Elizabeth's mother, my daughter, met a French musician who came to Japan on tour. It was a very different time, in our country as well as in the West. Even though the young rebelled against tradition, laws, and rules, both then and now. But at that time it felt new. The student strikes, the clashes with the police, the assault on Tokyo University. It looked wild to my generation. I couldn't approve of my daughter's relationship. You must understand. He arched his eyebrows as if apologizing to me. Yumiko is just as wayward as Elizabeth, perhaps even more so. I'm not denying my responsibility for what happened back then, not in the slightest. One way or another, Yumiko fled with Elizabeth's father to France. He remained silent for a while, giving me an intense look. Kobayashi-san, I didn't know. Of course you didn't, but you do now, though it's not the end of the story. Naturally, I couldn't give up on my daughter and leave her without any help. At the time, I didn't possess the resources I do now, but I still managed to keep track of her life. And the life she led there. Let me put it this way. It definitely wasn't what a father would wish for his daughter. I was familiar enough with the music and musicians of the 60s to understand what he was talking about. Yeah. Soon after Elizabeth was born, her parents died in a car accident. Her father got behind the wheel drunk after a concert. Damn, what? Are you sure about that, Mr. Kobayashi? Are you sure you're not repeating? Because I'm pretty sure Nick's parents died in a car crash too. Are you just kind of like a one-trick pony here, or what's going on? Fortunately, they had the mind to leave their daughter home. He grinned sadly. Yeah, how fortunate. How fortunate on a certain night when Elizabeth happened not to be in the car that happened. Yes. After Yumiko's death, I'd use every resource at my disposal to bring Elizabeth back to Japan. Believe me, Nikolai, it wasn't an easy task. I do. And now, when Elizabeth has grown up, I'm watching her follow in her father's footsteps. He stood up, locked his hands behind his back, and walked along the window. Yet she doesn't even remember him. She was 3 when they died. To be honest, I had a hunch that something tragic had happened to Ellie's parents, but I never imagined her father had been a musician. Did she inherit her passion for music and rebelliousness from him? Now you understand, Nikolai, why I'm doing everything I can to protect Elizabeth from the sinister consequences of this hobby. I do. I agreed, although it wasn't a question.
At the same time, I don't want to put too much pressure on her. I still blame myself for Yumiko's death.
Kobayashi Jun was being honest beyond all measure, but I couldn't hear the sincerity in his voice you'd expect from someone genuinely repentant for their actions. Yeah, it all seemed rehearsed. Just enough truth, spun the right way, to achieve his purpose. But I had no doubt that deep inside he did mourn his daughter's death.
Perhaps you've asked yourself the question, why do I allow Elizabeth such frivolous behavior? I mean her staying at your home almost every other night.
Kobayashi-san. I started already prepared for the worst, but the other man raised his hand, stopping me.
Wait, I haven't finished. It's not about you. She could have fallen in love with anybody and would act the same. I have to admit, you aren't the worst possible choice, but it changes nothing. So Nikolai.
He frowned, and I felt a shiver run down my spine.
I don't know how long your relationship is going to last. But if it ends the same way most teenage romances do, I don't want Elizabeth to suffer.
I'd never...
And second, you must make sure her obsession with this gaijin music won't lead to irreparable consequences.
I suddenly thought that I couldn't imagine him young, as if Kobayashi Jun had been born with a beard and in a kimono.
Did you understand me, Nikolai?
Even if his instructions were vague, they required no clarification. Except, do you want Ellie to stop playing music?
No, unless it affects her studies.
I understand.
I knew I could count on you.
He smiled for the first time in the conversation, walked to me, and shook my hand. Not very firmly, but not weakly either, putting in just the strength this situation required.
You'll be returned home.
Kagemaru let me out of the car, once again confirming I understood Kobayashi Dono's words. Ultimately, that conversation with the old man hadn't been any sort of revelation. At the same time, now I understood that the reasons for Ellie's behavior were far deeper and more complex than I first assumed. And there, Ellie was... The moment I took the key out of my pocket, she jumped out of the bushes where she had apparently been hiding so Kagemaru wouldn't see her. To be honest, I was about to get angry because he didn't wait for me, but I guess Grandpa is poking his nose where he shouldn't again. Jesus, don't scare me like that. I almost had a heart attack. I'm sorry. No, it's my fault. I should have warned you. I was offering mumbled excuses like I often used to with Himitsu. Except this time, absolutely no fault lay with me. I saw Kagemaru bring you here. What did Grandpa want from you? Kobayashi Jun didn't tell me whether or not I could tell Ellie about our conversation. Did he forget? That was unlikely. Let's get inside first. I closed the door with some relief, letting Ellie enter first. Your grandfather's just worried about you. And in the end, it was true. Any grandfather would act more or less like him in his place. The difference was, Kobayashi Jun had far more effective means of persuasion at his disposal than the ramblings of an old man. If he had his way, I'd spend my days under lock and key. Well, you're exaggerating. Still, what did he want from you? She frowned, stared at me intensely. He can't just ignore our relationship. I was having some trouble finding the words to express myself without saying too much, provoking yet another outburst from Ellie. That's nothing to do with him. And she exclaimed, but immediately stopped herself, like a cocky young vice president stared down by his older colleagues at a board meeting. He didn't threaten you, did he? No, not at all. I started waving my hands. I didn't even have to lie about that. Although a request from Kobayashi Jun was scarier than most people's threats. Then what did he want? Ellie asked in a resigned voice and sat down on a chair. He told me about your parents. What? I mean, I wasn't going to hide it from you, just all in good time. I understand. What exactly did he tell you? Now, this was a question where extreme caution was paramount. That they died in a car accident when you were little. Yes, same as your parents. She suddenly wrung her hands in desperation and looked at me as if I were a priest, expecting absolution. I didn't want you to pity me, like we're just the same sort of thing. Nothing good ever comes of that. Searching for a partner on the basis of similar emotional trauma is indeed a bad idea. But it also wasn't always possible to figure out what else beyond pure emotion drove Ellie. Hundreds of thousands of people die in car accidents every year. Many have children. And not all of them are similar. Yes, but... Besides, Ellen became an orphan pretty recently, and you... See? Here it goes. She interrupted me angrily. Just don't pity me. I didn't even think to. Ellie lowered her head, lost in thought. Yeah, made a fool out of myself again. Created so much fuss about nothing. Your action is completely natural. Uh-huh, sure. It's hard for me to remember my parents too. I wouldn't wish it on anyone to lose their loved ones. I barely remember them. I still have some photos of me with my parents and friends. I don't remember where or when they were taken. How old are you? 3? That's completely understandable. Maybe, but is it fair? I mean, my mom used to constantly blame my grandpa for everything. I smirked sadly. It's ironic. That's the one thing I remember. I can't remember what exactly she blamed him for, but that doesn't matter now. Grandpa didn't approve of her relationship with my dad, so they had to flee to France. The word flee somewhat alarmed me. Of course, it's possible that she was just exaggerating. I don't know what exactly my grandpa didn't approve of, but I think it was about my father being a musician. So Kobayashi Jun hadn't told her about the circumstances of her parents' death. Consequently, it was better for me not to mention it either. And now he wants me to stop playing music too. Can you imagine that? I can. To an extent, I could even understand Kobayashi Jun. An unhappy but alive child is better than a happy and dead one. He asked you to convince me to drop it, right? Well, doesn't matter. He does it to everyone. Ishida, Mitsuyoshi, and Tokyo Rider just didn't break under the pressure. So they struck me as confident guys for a reason. Ellie, you should know that I'm not afraid of him. I would never do something to hurt you. Of course, I wasn't fully honest. It was physically impossible not to be afraid of the head of Kobayashi Corporation. That didn't mean that I would act on that fear. On the other hand, my relationship with Ellie mostly started because I wanted her grandfather's protection. Really? She opened her eyes wide and looked at me pleadingly. Of course, I love you. I walked to her and gave her an affectionate kiss. Naturally, by doing so, I was risking her becoming even more emotionally unstable, but in this situation, I didn't have any other choice. You won't leave me like my parents? She broke into tears and wrapped her arms around my neck. No, of course not. I felt a surge of tenderness, but her behavior was still a little scary.